everyone, my name is Laura. Welcome to my channel. I wanted to read you guys a few stories that I read on Reddit nosleep. One of my favorite things to do as I'm getting ready for bed is lay down and read a few stories. I love the creepy, the psychological thriller, the horror side of things. These are just some that I thought were really fun, had some creepy aspects, but were not too scary. If you don't like this sort of thing, come back another time for one of my review videos. But if you love this, I'm going to try to make it a separate playlist. That way, once I have some accumulated, you can just watch them on through. And so I have 3 stories for you today. The first one is called Rules for Your New Home. It's by Ethan Enjoys Reddit. Hey kiddo, I'm really psyched to have you and your mom move into my place. But you gotta understand and follow a few guidelines to have a good time here. It's important that you follow every rule to the letter, just in case you need help around here. Number 1, in the case that you call out for me or your mother and you hear a meowing sound in response, immediately get to the attic and climb onto the highest thing you can. Knock everything else over. Then, it can't climb up to get you. If it does get you, I'm so sorry. Number 2, around 2 a.m. to about 5 a.m., you'll hear groans in the wall. Don't look too closely at the walls or go over to them. They act up in order to feed on you when you get too curious. Number 3, my puppy Rufus is not potty trained. However, in the event you stumble upon a puddle of urine, under no circumstances should you attempt to clean it up. After all, there are other animals other than Rufus that can produce harmful substances that look like ordinary urine. I once had a maid, and her hands were so horrifically misshapen after a certain event that she could never use them again. Number 4, look anywhere you can for secret messages or signs. Being superstitious is healthy if you're living in this house. The demons mainly communicate through messages, and it's possible reading into strange events and auras may save your life. Number 5, you should never hang any mirrors or pictures around the house. That gives them a gateway to possess the subject of the mirror or picture. You don't want to be on their side of the frame. Number 6, I suggest that you leave the house if you hear me or your mother screaming. They use the screams of your loved ones to trap you, so it's better to take the chance of letting us be taken instead of you being taken yourself. Number 7, never whistle. That summons them to your location within minutes, and the only way to get rid of them is to sing a religious hymn of your choosing. If you fail, well, let's just say it'll be tough to clean your remains off the sidewalk. Number 8, I have to stress this again. Signs of them and their schemes are everywhere. Check everything you see, hear, feel, smell, read, listen to, sense, taste, etc. The demons can implant false traps or true warnings into anything in this house. So be careful, alert, and observant. Good. Now you know the rules of the castle and how everything works in this house. With just enough luck, we'll all be happy living here. The last of the food will be in the fridge. I'll be home pretty soon with more groceries. Until then, relax and get accustomed to everything. Trust me, I guarantee your life has just gotten way better. I like that one because there is a comment just under the story that says, "Creepy, are there any secret messages in this post of yours?" And he says, maybe. If anyone's looking for a hint, certain letters from the beginning of the rules that line up suspiciously can spell out something concerning. If you go back and read the first letter of every single rule, it spells, I am lying. Okay, the second story that I wanted to read to you today is called Did I See a Demon? By Michael Ray. Back when I was in college, I had the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I mostly suppressed the memory until something reminded me of it, and now I can't stop thinking about it. Late at night, I would typically walk down a bike path to get to the train tracks with a friend. We would sit on the tracks, watch the moon rise over the lake, and walk back. The last time I ever went to these tracks, something terrifying happened to me. To set the scene, the bike path was surrounded by old industrial buildings, mostly with no windows facing the path. There were very few street lights to illuminate the path. Our arms were linked and we were standing on the right. Walking from the other direction was a man. Neither of us looked at him while he was walking towards us. As he was passing by my friend to the left of me, I decided to just glance, for no particular reason. This was when I saw what I saw. I looked up at him and we instantly locked eyes. He followed my eyes the entire time as he passed us, and I couldn't look away. I felt almost as if I was in some sort of trance. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs and my entire body tensed up. It wasn't until he passed us and looked away that I gasped for air and exclaimed, "Oh my God, what the heck?" My friend said, "What happened? Are you okay? I felt your whole body lock up." I asked, "Did you look at him?" She responded, "No." It was at this point we turned around to look again. But before I finish the story, I need to explain to you what he looked like. As soon as we made eye contact, I noticed how horrifying he was. He had on a primary colored suit with a blue jacket, yellow shirt, and a red tie. His eyes were wide open, almost bulging, like glass eyes. His skin was white and waxy, almost like it was wet, sort of like porcelain. He had this disgusting grin on his face that I will never be able to forget. His mouth was smiling so wide I could see all of his teeth. The only thing I can compare it to is a ventriloquist doll, and as he stared at me, smiling, I felt like I had no control. All of the breath in my lungs and all the joy that I felt had been ripped out of me. As we looked back, he was still walking down the path away from us, except now he was laughing and jumping. The way he jumped, it was so unnatural, almost as if he was a puppet on strings. I couldn't really bring myself to explain to my friend what I had saw. Mind you, at this time we were both around 21 years old. I was pretty athletic, and I felt confident in my ability to protect myself and her. But I was so afraid I couldn't bring myself to do anything but ask her, "Can we please run home?" So we both ran the entire way back. When we got back home, I was almost in a state of shock. I shakingly explained to her what I saw, and she said, "I'm sorry, I didn't see him." I replied, "You have no idea how thankful I am that you didn't." To this day, I still wonder what had happened if we had both looked. I feel like if we didn't have our arms locked, with her pulling me along, I would have no control to keep walking away. I had nightmares about him for weeks, and couldn't bring myself to focus on anything else during my classes. Eventually, I blocked this out of my memory until one night I was reminded of him. I'm posting this here because I have searched the internet and haven't found any information about what he could have been or what I might have seen. I just felt like I had stared into the face of evil, of someone who has done horrible things. I have looked up ventriloquism and found some information about its potentially demonic roots, but I haven't seen any testimony relating to mine. If anyone has any information about what I might have seen, please let me know. The lack of knowledge I have about him keeps me up at night. I'm hoping that with knowledge, I maybe can get some closure. Okay, the third story I'm going to read you is a little bit longer. This one is called Why I Sleep with My Blinds Closed by a Priest of Judas. I moved out of my home about 3 years ago and have fairly regularly insisted on having rooms in the various apartments I've lived in that either don't have windows or at least have shutters that close. It always struck me as strange when my housemates would ask me, "Why do you always keep them closed?" I never gave them any details other than the usual excuses. Wanting to sleep in, keeps the temperature how I like. You know, the usual excuses. None of them have ever known. For a bit of background, my old family house was in what you'd call a safe neighborhood, if a such thing exists. Nothing ever really happened, and it was kind of just boring. I'm an only child. My parents usually gave me a relative autonomy. They trusted me enough not to do anything stupid, and always made sure I was with someone if I left the house. And for a while, it seemed pretty normal. 17 years I lived in that house, and it was the last one that I first started getting a weird feeling. It tends to be the paranoid feeling you get that someone's watching you. Everyone experiences it at least once, and is usually little more than an overactive imagination. But this time, it felt different. My bedroom used to look over our backyard. It was generally pretty blocked off. There was no street access, and the fence line was hidden by a few big trees, so it felt pretty safe. This was a time I also liked to have my window blinds open. I'm a big early bird, and it was a very relaxing thing to be awoken by the sun every morning. However, one night, I couldn't sleep. For the record, I'm usually a pretty heavy sleeper. I never really stress over stuff like exams or finances before I sleep, so this was odd for me. At first, I couldn't place it, at least until about 11:30 that night. I could hear a curious tapping on my window, as if someone was throwing rocks at it. Looking out into the yard, I couldn't see anything, but I could feel uneasy, like something was out there. I'd never felt this way before, and I didn't like it. The next morning, I asked my parents about this. They hadn't heard anything, but told me if I was on edge, to maybe listen to something as I slept. I tried it that next night, and to my concern, it didn't seem to help. I couldn't hear the tapping anymore, but I still felt uneasy. Looking out into the yard, I still couldn't work out why. Even under a full moon, when my backyard was illuminated, I couldn't see anything. I thought through all of this, I must be losing my mind. This was the first night I ever closed the blinds. The next morning, I still felt on edge, and my parents finally decided that this wasn't like me to have this problem. They'd never seen me act like this, so they were just as concerned as I was. It was a Friday, so they told me I could have a friend over, hopefully to ease my mind a bit. To their credit, it kinda did. My blinds were still shut, but my friend at least understood and helped to take my mind off of it, even if only for a little while. Us being teenagers, we naturally were awake pretty late, the room only lit by a lamp as we talked into the night. My friend, clearly seeing that her being there was having a positive effect, had finally convinced me that I was just being silly, and it was probably just a bird or something that had probably gone by now. That was until the next morning. How the mail delivery service worked in my town on the weekends is all the mail came Saturday in the mid-afternoon. So my parents were naturally curious the next day when a weathered envelope had turned up on our doorstep with no stamps or anything on it. Unmistakably though, it was for me. My first name was on the front. My hands had started shaking as I was handed the envelope, and turned to terrified screams as I read its contents. On a single grubby sheet of paper, in a scrawl that was barely legible, "Who's your friend?" I couldn't stay in the house that night. I just couldn't. My friend was more than happy to have me at hers for the rest of the weekend. We didn't do much except stay in her room, me huddled in the corner with a bat in my hand. By the time I finally convinced myself to come home, my parents had redone our entire security system at the house. Floodlights in the front and backyards, deadbolts on every door and window lock, burglar alarms, the works. Even the trees and hedges in the backyard had been cut away, so there was no way of anyone hiding there. Our neighbors, too, had been put on alert for anything suspicious. That night, it took me a long time to get to sleep. My parents tried as much as they could to stay with me, but even I knew my room wasn't big enough for me and two grown adults. At about midnight, I finally managed to close my eyes with great difficulty. Nothing happened that night. 4 nights passed before things started to get weird again. I never went anywhere alone anymore, and it felt like I was under constant watch because, technically, I was. The only time I ever spent alone in my room, the blinds now closed for good. It made me sad to be robbed of something I loved so much, but peace of mind was more important. As I was settling in for the night, I couldn't help but dwell on who had been watching me, and even more terrifying, for how long. I'd almost managed to fall asleep when it happened. The floodlights went off. At first, I thought nothing of it. My neighbors have cats who tend to roam, and the floodlight sensors are very easy to trip. After about a minute, the thin lines of light in my upturned blinds disappeared. But then it happened again. 3 more times it happened, and each time I was less and less inclined to sleep. I was shaking again as they finally went off, but remained silent. They didn't come on again, but in their place was a very definite sound of a footstep on the concrete, like the concrete that stood out before our yard, just outside of the range of the lights. He can't see me, I kept telling myself. He can't see me. It's pitch black. He can't see me. I felt like an hour went by before I finally pulled myself up enough to see what was there. I know I shouldn't have. I was terrified to see anything, but I just had to know. Peering through the slits in the blinds, it took 5 seconds before I finally screamed. Below me was a large man. I couldn't see much of him, but it was undeniable. He was looking at me. Not at my window, at me. Right in my eyes, almost as if he knew where I'd been the entire time. All I could make out as I crashed to the ground in hysterics was his wide eyes and a large Cheshire grin, chuckling as he continued to stare. The police never found him, never knew how he managed to get into our yard, or even what he was doing. My parents sent me to stay with relatives for the rest of the year. I wouldn't go anywhere near that house, not even to see my parents again. No one I've lived with knows this. I'm terrified of looking out my windows, knowing at any point he could be there, and I'd never know it. Alright, that's all the scary stories I have for us today. I do plan on reading a few more, probably in a few weeks. Go ahead and give me a subscribe so that way you guys can see them when they are ready. If you liked this, give me a like. Also, give me any comments with any suggestions of stories that you'd like to hear. And also, in a few weeks, I have coming up my next review on the laser hair removal. If you're interested, I'll be doing my 6-month update. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye.